Hey everyone. So I recently was asked, actually numerous times by multiple people, uh, about my RPG and kind of how how will I know that it's done, and how do I know how far into it I am? I tend to tell people I'm between 90 and 95% done with this thing, uh, but that there's still a lot more work to do. So, where do I get these numbers from? Well, I think first I want to talk a little bit about just creative works in general and how do you know. So, I guess for the majority of artwork, there's a few kind of leading ideas as uh, to how you know when your art is finished. Some say that your art is finished when you feel like it is done, right? When it is perfected and super uh, realized version of what you were intending. Most people don't feel that way. I think partially due to a tendency for us to reevaluate our art, reevaluate our work in general, and always finding new flaws with everything, basically. No, there are other people that will say that artwork is never finished, that you continue to work on it because you will never be satisfied. Then there's those who say that it's finished as soon as you stop, meaning don't analyze it. You stopped for a reason. You did what you thought you needed to do. And maybe it's not perfect upon reanalyzing it even moments later, but you stopped. So it's done. I kind of like that. This is not the method that I necessarily use for most of my works, but for certain things, it definitely applies, or at least to some degree. So, for static artwork, especially two-dimensional art, painting, photography, drawing, things like that, I find it to be much more powerful of a method of knowing when to stop. Right? You work on something until you have to then take a step back and analyze it. And at that point, you're done. You put it to the side and you get a new canvas and you start a new image. Even if it's the same image, that one is done. That image exists in that version permanently from now on. Now, if you were thinking, well, there's things wrong with it, you fix it on the next one. And this is kind of similar to, on some level, new versions of books that come out, new editions, and new updates to operating systems and software like video games, where a game can be there, the core is there, the idea is there, but maybe certain things just don't quite work the way, especially the way that they intended them to. and you update them. You fix it in a new version. So this is super useful for you to kind of get better at your craft. And kind of an example of this for me is that in high school I had painted something. I painted a piece, and I wasn't quite satisfied with it. There was a few changes I would have liked to have made, but the deadline to have the piece done came up, and I just had to accept that was the way to go with it. Incidentally, this piece then went on into the art gallery and was sold. And so I used that money to buy the materials and tools to make the image that I originally wanted to make, the image that I failed to do with the original. And that basically, I think, and even then, I wasn't totally satisfied. And you'll see that type of mentality with a lot, like all the famous painters and sculptors, that they've got so many different iterations of the same image, where there's slight adjustments or whatever that are just previous versions or like kind of a prototype. And it's kind of them getting in the mindset, the muscle memory, getting into the imagining of the image that they really want to portray, and kind of setting themselves up to be able to put that actually on canvas. And so that's super useful. But deadlines are a reality. And this is one of the reasons why that method is useful. But a lot of the times, if you put yourself to a realistic expectation as far as deadlines go and things like that, you should be able to get a more perfected end result. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is going back to my RPG. How do I know it's done? I keep a running list of changes that I want to make. So this list of changes that I want to make, where I'm like, I have to do all the artwork for this. I know that it still needs all the artwork. And then after I make all the artwork and I place it into the handbook, I'm going to have to move charts, graphs, and blocks of text, move the different chapters around. So I'm reformatting it after that. So I know that that's another thing I'm going to have to do after I do the artwork. Then there's section changes. Like for a little while there was, character options. And like I need to add a whole chunk of character options. And that's going to involve a lot of not just think this thing up and put it on the paper, but rather I have to, do the calculating, run the tests to see if it's balanced and still fun, and that I would likely do these actions, and then figure out a way to implement it that is as seamless as possible. And that there's so many different elements to every project that it's a good idea to kind of itemize them a little bit. When it comes to filmmaking, this is kind of mandatory, and you'll see it in every major film. There's so many different things. You've got your shot lists and your Um, your schedule basically is telling you down to the the like 5 minutes or so, where you need to be, and if you start falling off of that path, then you have to make other changes, uh, either cutting parts of the project that you feel are the least necessary, or just overall reducing the quality of things. So it's a fight, it's a struggle, and this is kind of one of the reasons why, on some level, why ADs or assistant directors are super useful, so well sought in the industry. A good one is can make or break a production, and it really comes down to that. It comes down to how good are you at keeping track of the amount of time and effort and resources you are putting into your project. All of that kind of comes into play. It's not just, I feel this project is done, so it's done. If you're a single person doing the project and you're doing it for yourself, more power to you. But if you are doing it for a client, or you are intending to sell it, to use it as a source of income, that is not going to work, because people are going to be relying on you to be done when you say you're going to be done. So with a film, this is super obvious. You have, for one, all the marketing resources. You tell people this film is coming October 23rd or whatever. That's what people are going to be looking for. They're going to try to remember that date. That's when this film comes out. That's where I'm going to go. But not just the audience. We also have to think about the theaters and the advertising agencies and basically anybody involved in marketing and selling this film. If you are late in giving it out to them, then they have to rush. They have a shorter lead time, which means they probably are going to have a smaller or a lower quality of on their end, which means, if you rush the marketing, generally it's noticeable on some level, but this can result in less people viewing it. So it's tricky, and you really got to get it done on time. Obviously, every film has reshoots and edits and re-edits, and sometimes there will be like a scene added or whatever that was not preemptively thought of. But in the grand scheme of things, the beginning to end length of a production is so long that a little bit there is not going to change too much, and you make account for that. You're going to have to spend an extra 10% or whatever of time on reshoots and things like that. So it's not like you weren't expecting there to be some variation in the end. And that's kind of what I've done with my RPG. There's some variation in the end. I know that there's certain things that I want to do. I know that that they'll take X amount of time, and then there's some variation. I don't have a release date because this is not a project that I'm necessarily doing with all intents purposes of making money. It's more I'm going to say a fun side project that's been ongoing for a while, but rather it's something that I just want people to play. So, but with that in mind, at some point I will need to start the marketing process and all of that as if it was something that was to be used for income. And I do intend on selling it, just not like, this is not going to be some big seller kind of thing. Like, it's not my goal. I was actually debating on if I would do like suggested donation or something like that. But I think the more important thing for me than making making money from it is just getting people to play it. More eyes, better. So in that regard, it doesn't, what I'm doing doesn't necessarily match, and I kind of fall back on what I had said before, where your deadline is not super important. It is, but it isn't. In general, deadlines with art is not super important, but it is very important. But yeah, so how do you know? I mean, how do you know when your art projects are done? What kind of work do you do? I'm actually asking you. Because I feel that what I previously said holds, that generally it's different from project to project. It's different from person to person. And for purpose to purpose. So if you're doing something that is, you're constructing something that is just going to be placed in your home, right? That level of project, how do you know when it's done? How do you know how far into it you are? And it all applies still. As soon as you stop working on it, it's done applies, and it's never finished applies. And it really comes down to you, the creative individual, doing this project and deciding what's important. So, with that, thanks for watching.